The rich man pressed another poster against the cold street pole, his fingers shaking so hard that the tape tore between them. Cars rushed past, people walked by without really looking. But his eyes stayed locked on the same small face printed on the paper, a brown-eyed boy with a shy smile and a tiny dimple in his left cheek. The picture had been taken on a happy morning, but now it felt like a picture from another life. The man's expensive shirt was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and his hair was messy like he had not slept in days. For weeks he had been searching. For weeks the city had become one endless, painful street. He smoothed the poster down and stepped back, his chest heavy, his throat burning. "Please," he whispered to no one, "someone must have seen him." Just then a small voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, sir," he turned. A little girl stood a few feet away on the sidewalk, holding a plastic grocery bag in one hand. She was about 8 years old, with dark braids pulled back into a ponytail and a faded pink t-shirt that was a little too big for her. Her sneakers were scuffed and her jeans had a tiny tear at one knee. But her eyes were wide and sharp, staring at the poster like it had jumped off the wall and grabbed her. She stepped closer, very slowly, like she was afraid to be wrong. Her lips trembled as she looked up at the tired millionaire. "Sir," she said in a low, careful voice, that boy lives in my house." The sounds of the street seemed to vanish. He felt his heart slam against his ribs so hard he thought he might fall. For a moment he could not even breathe. The little girl pointed at the picture with a hand that was shaking. "I know him," she whispered. "He eats at our table. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something important. If you want to know how this story ends, how this father found out the truth about his missing son, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. It helps this channel grow so we can keep sharing more life-changing stories like this one. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Are you in your room under a blanket, sitting in the living room with your family, on a bus, on your way somewhere? Type the name of your city or country below. Now let me take you back to where all of this started, before a little girl on a busy street broke a rich man's heart with one simple sentence. A few months earlier, Derek Cole lived in a world made of glass, steel, and quiet. He was a millionaire many times over, the owner of tall office buildings that rose high above the city, with his name shining in silver letters near the top. People stepped aside when they saw him walk through the lobby. Drivers opened doors for him, assistants rushed behind him carrying files and phones. His suits were always pressed, his shoes always clean, his tie always straight. To everyone else his life looked perfect. Inside his penthouse the floors were shiny marble, the windows stretched from ceiling to floor, and the city lights at night looked like stars he could touch. Expensive paintings hung on the walls. A grand piano sat near the balcony, even though no one played it. There was a private elevator, a private gym, and even a private chef who prepared meals that were arranged like pictures on white plates. But there was only one thing in that huge, perfect home that truly mattered to Derek: his 6-year-old son Mason. Mason's small bedroom was the only place where the house felt warm. Tiny toy cars lined the shelves. A blue blanket with rockets and stars was always a little messy on the bed. Crayon drawings were taped crookedly to the wall, drawings that the maid kept trying to straighten before Derek stopped her and said, "Leave them. He likes them that way." On most mornings the sun would pour into the kitchen while Mason sat at the counter swinging his legs, eating cereal and humming little songs under his breath. "Dad, are you going to be home early tonight?" he would ask, his spoon halfway to his mouth. And almost every time Derek would glance at his watch, sigh, and say, "I'll try, buddy. I have a big meeting." Then he would ruffle the boy's hair, grab his briefcase, and hurry toward the door while his phone buzzed with messages. "You always say that," Mason would mumble softly when he thought his father had already left. But the words followed Derek into the elevator. There was one person who kept trying to pull Derek back toward his family. His younger sister Hannah, who sometimes came to watch Mason when the nanny had to leave early. She did not live in a penthouse. She lived in a simple apartment with bright curtains and plants on the balcony. She worked as a nurse at a small clinic and always smelled faintly of soap and hand sanitizer. Often she would stand in Derek's kitchen with her arms crossed and look at him over the top of her coffee mug. "He's growing up fast, you know," she would say. "He doesn't care how tall your building is, he just wants you to be at his school play." "I know," Derek would answer without looking up from his phone. "Once this project is done, I'll have more time." "You said that last year," Hannah would reply, "and the year before." But Derek pushed her words away the same way he pushed away worry about his health or about the loneliness that crept into his chest late at night when the city outside was quiet. He told himself that everything he did was for his son, for his future, for his safety. Money meant security. Money meant nothing bad could happen. At least, that is what he thought. Then came the day that broke everything. It was a Friday, bright and warm, with clear blue skies above the city. Derek had an early video meeting at home before heading to the office. He walked around with his earpiece in, talking about contracts and deadlines, while Mason sat on the floor in the living room building a tower out of colorful blocks. Dad, look, Mason called out as Derek paced back and forth. It's taller than me. Just a minute, buddy, Derek said, checking a chart on his laptop. We are almost done. The meeting dragged on and on. Numbers, charts, voices, plans. At one point Mason walked over and touched his father's arm. Can we go to the park later? He asked. You promised last week. Derek muted himself for 1 second. I'll see what I can do, okay? Maybe Aunt Hannah can take you if I'm busy. A shadow crossed the boy's face, but he nodded and went back to his tower. If Derek had ended the meeting right then, if he had turned off his laptop and gone to sit on the floor next to his son, everything might have been different. But he did not. When his call finally ended, the apartment was too quiet. The tower of blocks still stood in the middle of the rug, but the little boy was gone. At first, Derek thought Mason had gone to his room. Mace, he called, walking down the hallway. No answer. The bathroom door was open. The bedroom was empty. He checked behind the curtains in the laundry room, on the balcony, even inside the closets, as if the boy might pop out laughing. Very funny, Derek said, his voice a little too loud. Game over, buddy, come out. Silence. A slow, cold feeling started to crawl up his spine. He moved faster now, his footsteps echoing through the penthouse. Mason, he called again, his voice shaking. He grabbed his phone and called the nanny. Did you take him down to the playroom? He asked. No, sir, she answered. You told me to come 1 hour later today, remember, because you had a meeting and wanted the house quiet. Derek's heart dropped. The front door was closed, but the small extra lock high on the frame was not turned. The security camera near the door blinked a tiny red light. He rushed to the building's control room, his chest tight, and demanded the footage. On the screen they watched together. There was Derek walking into his office with his laptop. There was Mason playing with his blocks. Then 10 minutes later, a delivery man knocked at the door with a food order Derek had forgotten he even clicked. In the confusion and the hurry, the door stayed unlocked for just a little longer than it should have. A shadow passed in the hallway. A figure in a dark hoodie and jeans slipped through the barely open door, moving like they knew exactly where they were going. The security guard paused the video, zoomed in, rewound, zoomed in again. The face was hard to see, hidden deep inside the hood. How did no one notice this? Derek yelled, his fists clenched. This is a luxury building, the guard swallowed. Sir, there are people coming and going all day. We thought it was one of the workers from maintenance. We are trying to see if he left by the back door. They watched in horror as the hooded figure moved into the living room, spoke to the boy for a moment, then took his small hand. Mason did not pull away. He looked confused but not terrified. It was like he knew the person, like he trusted them. Who is that? Derek whispered. Before anyone could answer, the figure led Mason out of the apartment. The elevator doors closed. The video stopped. The next hours were a blur of sirens, shouts, and questions. The police came. They took screenshots from the camera. They asked about enemies, angry ex-workers, people who might want money. They held up old photos, names, stories from years ago. Derek tried to think, but his mind felt like it was full of smoke. Can't you trace his phone? He shouted at one point, even though he knew his son did not have a phone of his own yet. Can't you track every car that left this building? They did what they could. They checked the exits. They checked the street cameras. They checked the parking garage. It felt like the kidnapper had vanished into the air, taking the boy with them. On the first night, the police told him, stay near your phone. If this is a ransom case, they will call. Derek sat in his office with both hands wrapped around his phone, waiting for it to ring. It never did. Days turned into weeks. The news called it the mystery penthouse kidnapping. Reporters ran stories about the rich man who lost his son in the middle of the day. Some people whispered that maybe it was an inside job. Some said it was a mistake that could have been stopped if the father had been paying more attention. Those words hurt more than any knife. But Derek did not care what the world said. He only cared about one thing, finding his child. He stopped going into the office. He shouted at the security team. He hired private investigators and promised them more money than they had ever seen if they brought back the boy. At night he walked through Mason's room, touching the small shoes by the door, the stuffed animal on the pillow, the little drawings on the wall. I'm coming, he would whisper. I promise I'm coming. Time did not heal anything. It only made the ache deeper, but it also made one thing clear to Derek. Money could not do everything. It could not control strangers on the street. It could not rewind time. It could not bring his son back with the snap of a finger. So he did something that many rich people would never think to do. He went out into the city himself. He went into markets and small stores, into cheap diners and bus stations, into neighborhoods he had only ever seen from behind the tinted windows of his car. He carried a stack of posters under his arm. Each one had the same picture, the same big, bold word missing. Have you seen this boy? He would ask again and again. Please, have you seen him? Most people shook their heads with sad eyes. Some glanced at the picture and walked away. Children stared. A few people asked for money for information they did not really have. But Derek kept going. Every day he tried a different route, a different block, a different corner. It was one of those days under a bright sun that felt too warm for such a sad afternoon when he found himself on a busy street filled with small shops, food stands, and people carrying plastic bags. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His throat was dry. His fingers were raw from handling tape. But he stopped at another pole and pressed another poster against the metal, hoping that this one would be the one that made a difference. He did not know that a pair of young eyes had been watching him from across the street. On the other side of the road, a little girl walked beside a tired woman who held two heavy grocery bags. The girl kept looking up at the posters the man was hanging. At first she did not understand. She just saw a picture of a child, a boy with familiar brown eyes and a shy smile. She thought it was an advertisement for a school or a toy. Then she heard one word spoken quietly by a woman who walked past. Missing. The girl's feet slowed, her heart beat faster. She looked again at the picture. It was clearer now. The small dimple in the boy's cheek. The way his hair fell a little over his forehead. The way his head tilted when he smiled, like he was a little shy and a little curious at the same time. He looked like the boy who had been eating at her table. The boy who slept in the small room next to hers. The boy who had told her that his name was Mason and that he used to live up high in a glass house. The bags in her mother's hands pulled on her arms as they walked, but the girl stopped. "Mom," she said slowly, her voice thin. "That boy." Her mother was in a hurry. She did not look up. "Keep walking, Lee," she said. "The ice cream will melt." Lee turned her head, staring at the man in the wrinkled shirt and the poster in his hands. The man's shoulders were bent and his eyes looked like they had not seen sleep in a long time. He tore off another piece of tape and pressed the paper down. Lee's heart pounded in her ears. "Mom, wait," she whispered, but her mother was already a few steps ahead. Weaving through the crowd, Lee's feet would not move. She dropped one of the plastic bags and ran across the street before she could talk herself out of it. Cars honked, someone shouted, but she kept going until she stood right in front of the man with the posters. Up close he looked even more broken. His expensive watch did not match his tired face. His eyes moved over her quickly as if he expected her to keep walking like everyone else. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice rough. Lee's hands felt cold and sweaty at the same time. She looked up at the picture again and swallowed hard. The boy in the photo looked back at her like he was asking her to say something. "Sir," she said softly. He did not answer. He was already reaching into his bag for another poster. Lee took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling. She tugged at his sleeve. This time he turned fully toward her. The whole world seemed to shrink down to his tired eyes and her frightened ones. "What is it, kid?" asked. "I'm busy." She pointed at the poster on the pole. Her finger trembled. "That boy," she whispered, "lives in my house." For a moment he thought he had misheard her. The street noise, the cars, the voices, everything blurred together. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely more than air. Lee licked her dry lips. "I know him," she said. "He came to stay with us. My mom said he needed a safe place. He sleeps in the small room by the window. He eats with us. He cries at night sometimes." Everything inside Derek went still. The posters slid from his hand and scattered on the sidewalk. He grabbed the nearest pole to keep himself from falling. "You're sure?" he asked, his eyes wide open now. "You are absolutely sure," Lee nodded quickly, her braids bouncing. "He told me his name is Mason," she said. "He said his dad was rich and busy and lived in a house in the sky. He said he misses him when he hugs his pillow." A sound came out of Derek's throat, halfway between a sob and a laugh. It felt like a door opening and slamming shut at the same time. Hope crashed into fear so hard that he felt dizzy. "Where do you live?" he demanded, trying not to scare her but failing. "Can you take me there?" Lee stepped back, her eyes suddenly nervous. "My mom said not to talk to strangers," she murmured. "She said not to tell people where we live." Derek forced himself to breathe. He bent down so his eyes were level with hers. "You're right," he said gently. "Your mom is smart. But listen to me, that boy in your house is my son. Someone took him from me. I have been looking for him for a long time. Please, I just need to see him. We can call the police if you want. I will not hurt you. I just need to know he is okay." Lee stared at him for a long moment. His eyes were wet. His hands were shaking. He did not look like a dangerous stranger. He looked like someone who had been broken in half. She thought of the nights when she heard Mason crying through the thin wall, whispering "Dad, please" into his pillow when he thought no one could hear. She thought of how he stared out the window like he was looking for someone in the sky. Finally she nodded. "My house is not far," she said, but there is something you need to know before we go." His heart jumped. "What?" he asked, his mouth dry. Lee's voice dropped to a whisper. "The person who brought him to us said you didn't want him anymore," she said. "They told him you traded him for money." The words hit Derek like a punch. He staggered back, his vision blurring. "That's not true," he choked. "Who said that? Who told him that?" Lee swallowed and looked down at her shoes. "I think you know her," she whispered, "because she cries when she says your name." Derek's pulse roared in his ears. Her who was her, an old enemy, someone from his past, someone he had hurt without meaning to. He tried to speak, but his throat felt tight. Lee's mother, who had finally noticed her daughter was gone, was pushing through the crowd toward them, her eyes wide and worried. Lee grabbed Derek's hand before he could lose his chance. "If you really want to see him," she said quickly, "you have to come now before she comes back." "Before who comes back?" he demanded, but his voice broke. Lee looked up at him, fear and urgency shining in her eyes. "The woman who took him," she said. "The woman who said you broke her heart. She lives with us too." Derek stared at her, his mind spinning. The woman who took his son was inside the same house as this little girl. A house that might be only a few blocks away. A house where his child had been living, believing the worst thing a kid could ever believe about a parent, that they had been thrown away. "Take me there," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Please." Lee squeezed his hand, then let go and started walking fast down the sidewalk, glancing over her shoulder to make sure he was following. He gathered his fallen posters with trembling fingers, stuffed them under his arm, and hurried after her, his heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. As they turned off the busy street into a narrow side road lined with small old houses and cracked sidewalks, Derek felt the glass world of his towers fall farther and farther behind him. Every step took him closer to the truth, closer to his son, closer to the person who had stolen the one thing money could never replace. Lee stopped in front of a tiny, faded house with peeling paint and a small, rusty gate. She pointed at the door with a shaking finger. "He's inside," she whispered, "but if she sees you, I don't know what she will do." Derek swallowed hard, his legs suddenly weak. He could hear a faint sound from inside the house, like a child's laughter or a child's cry. He took one step toward the door, his hand lifting slowly, his knuckles just inches from the wood, his heart about to burst out of his chest, not knowing if his son would run into his arms or turn away in fear after what he had been told. And just as his fist was about to knock, the door handle began to turn from the inside. Someone was opening the door, someone who held the truth that could either heal his world or destroy it completely. The door opened with a slow, tired creak, and for a heartbeat Derek forgot how to breathe as he stared at the shadow in the doorway, expecting to see some cruel stranger with hard eyes and a tight jaw, someone who would slam the door in his face and drag his son away. But instead, a woman in her late 30s stood there, holding a dish towel in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Flour dusted across the front of her worn blue t-shirt like she had been baking, not stealing children, and her eyes went from Lee to the tall man on the step with confusion and fear mixing so fast they almost looked like one emotion, and for a few strange seconds nobody spoke, the world holding its breath with them. "Lee," the woman said, her voice sharp but shaking, "what did I tell you about running off like that? I thought you were right behind me. Who is this man?" Lee pressed closer to Derek's side, her small hand gripping the edge of his crumpled shirt, and he felt the heat of that tiny, trusting touch push him to speak even though his mouth was dry. "My name is Derek Cole," he managed, his voice low and rough, "and I think my son is inside your house." The woman's fingers tightened around the spoon so hard that the wood creaked. For a moment her face went blank, like someone had pulled a curtain over all her feelings, but her eyes flicked down to the poster sticking out from under his arm and she saw the photo, the bold word missing, the name printed at the bottom, and all the color drained from her cheeks. "We should not talk about this out here," she whispered quickly, looking up and down the street as if the cracked pavement had ears. "Come inside, but I need you to understand something before you do anything foolish. No shouting. No grabbing, no scaring him." Derek's heart pounded so hard it hurt. "I would never hurt him," he said, almost offended that anyone could think that, but the woman's eyes flashed with a kind of tired anger that made him stop. "I'm not worried about you hurting him with your hands," she said quietly. "I'm worried about you hurting him with your words." She stepped aside, leaving the door open just enough for them to enter, and the smell of something warm and simple, maybe beans and rice, floated out, so different from the fancy food his chef used to make that it almost felt like stepping into another world. Derek crossed the threshold, his chest tight, his hands slightly shaking, and Lee slipped in behind him, closing the door softly as her mother. Because he understood now that this woman had to be her mother, led them down a narrow hallway with peeling paint and family photos hanging slightly crooked on the walls. The whole house felt small and full and alive, nothing like the echoing silence of his penthouse, and every step made Derek feel bigger and clumsier, like he did not belong in a place where people squeezed past each other in hallways and shared one small bathroom and passed plates around a table that barely fit them all. "My name is Carla," the woman said over her shoulder, her voice low. "I did not take your son. I want you to know that before you see him. I work 2 jobs. I don't have time to steal anyone's child. But somebody brought him to my door, and when I saw his eyes I could not turn him away. The hallway opened into a tiny living room that doubled as a dining room, with a faded couch pushed against one wall, a small square table pressed against another, and a television sitting on a stand that leaned slightly to one side. On the table, 3 plates were already set, each with a spoon beside it. Pot simmered in the cramped kitchen area just beyond, the lid rattling softly with the steam. There were schoolbooks piled in one corner, a pair of small shoes under a chair, and a thin blanket folded neatly on the arm of the couch. To Derek, every object in that room screamed with a single, painful thought. His son had been living here instead of at home, eating from that table, watching that old TV, sleeping under that thin blanket instead of his rocket blanket. Where is he? Derek asked, his voice a hoarse whisper as his eyes darted around the room like they might somehow pull the boy out of the air. In the back room, Carla replied. He's drawing. He does that a lot when he doesn't want to talk. Before we go in, you need to know something. The woman who brought him, she said things that broke him, Mr. Cole. He believes you left him. He believes no one was looking. When I saw your posters on the news, I knew she'd lied, but I didn't know how to make him believe it without hurting him even more. Derek's heart twisted as if someone had reached inside and squeezed. Who is she? He asked, his voice shaking. Who told him that? Carla stared at him for a moment, studying his face like she was trying to see if he was ready for the answer. She said her name is Dana, she finally said. She said she used to work for you. She cried when she talked about you. Sometimes she cursed you. Sometimes she defended you. It was strange, like she hated you and loved you at the same time. The name hit Derek like a gust of wind from the past. He swayed where he stood, his vision clouding with memories he had buried under meetings and deals and the quiet hum of office air conditioners. Dana. Years ago she had been his assistant, the one who stayed late when he stayed late, the one who kept his calendar straight, the one who knew which clients were lying and which ones were scared, the one who had stared at him with hurt in her eyes when he had chosen his work over everything else. There had been a time when she had looked at him like he was the center of her world, and he had pretended not to notice because he told himself feelings would only complicate things. He had given her a raise instead of his attention. He had given her a bonus instead of an apology. And then, after one terrible mistake in a deal that was partly his fault but fully blamed on her, he had let her go without fighting for her, telling himself he could not risk his company's image for one employee, no matter how loyal she had been. He had walked away from her tears that day. He had not imagined she would ever walk back into his life like this. She took my son, he whispered, more to himself than to Carla. She took my son because of me. She brought him here, Carla corrected gently. But she didn't stay, she comes and goes. Sometimes she sends money in an envelope with no return address. Sometimes she stands outside at night thinking I don't see her, watching the window of his room, but she doesn't come in. I told her I would call the police if she tried to take him again. Lee shifted beside him, and when he looked down, he saw her watching him carefully as if she was trying to read his heart on his face. He talks about you, she said softly. He says he misses your voice, but he is also angry. Because he thinks you chose your building over him. Derek felt the words cut deep, but he did not flinch away. He had spent months punishing himself in his mind. Hearing it out loud only made the truth harder and clearer. He had been a father who let his work become a wall between him and his child. Now that wall had cracks in it, but there was still another wall, built out of lies someone else had told in his name. I need to see him, Derek said, his voice trembling but firm now. Whether he hates me or not, whether he runs to me or runs away, I need to see him, please. Carla nodded slowly, like someone who had already made a hard choice long ago and was now watching it finally reach its end. All right, she said quietly. But remember, his feelings are all he has right now. Don't break them more than they already are. She walked toward the narrow hallway at the back of the living room and motioned for him to follow. The air seemed thicker there, like it was harder to breathe. Each step felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Derek could hear a faint scratch sound, like a pencil moving quickly over paper. Carla stopped outside a door with chipped paint and a sticker of a cartoon rocket half peeled off the wood. The sight of that rocket made Derek's eyes sting. He likes space, Carla murmured. He said his dad used to tell him the stars were like city lights in the sky. Derek pressed his lips together to keep a sob from escaping. He used to fall asleep by the window, he whispered. We would make up stories about the constellations. Carla looked at him with something like pity, then she raised her hand and knocked gently on the door. Mace, she called softly. Dinner is almost ready, and there's someone here who wants to see you. The scratching stopped. Silence fell heavy and tight. For a second, Derek imagined his son pressing his ear against the door, trying to recognize the voice on the other side. His heart pounded in his ears. His hands felt ice cold. The door handle turned slowly. The door opened just a crack at first, a single brown eye peeking out. Then the door swung wider, and there he was. Mason stood in the doorway in a faded red t-shirt and gray shorts that were a little too big for him, his bare feet on the worn wooden floor. His hair was a bit longer than Derek remembered, curling slightly at the ends. There was a small smudge of pencil on his cheek and a streak of blue crayon on his hand. In his other hand he held a sheet of paper filled with stars drawn in shaky lines. His eyes met Derek, and the world stopped. For a moment the boy's face lit up like a hidden light switch had been flipped inside him. His mouth opened, his eyes went wide, and Derek saw pure recognition, pure joy, like all the nights of praying and all the mornings of waking up alone had just cracked open to let light in. "Dad," he breathed. But the word was barely out before something else crashed through his expression: fear, confusion, hurt. The joy faltered, wobbled, then folded in on itself like a paper airplane caught in the rain. He took a small step backward, his fingers tightening around the drawing so hard that the paper crinkled. "No," he whispered, his chin trembling. "You can't be here, you're not supposed to be here." The words felt like stones dropping into Derek's chest. "Mason," he said softly, taking a tiny step forward, his hands open, empty. "It's me, I've been looking for you everywhere, I never stopped, not for one day." The boy's eyes flashed with anger now, hot and bright. "That's not true," he shot back, his small voice suddenly sharp. "She said you made a deal. She said you wanted your building more than you wanted me. She said you signed papers so you could forget me without trouble." Derek flinched like he had been slapped. Behind him, Lee shifted nervously and Carla's face tightened. "Who told you that?" Derek asked, even though he already knew the answer, his voice shaking so hard it almost broke. "Who said I didn't want you?" Mason lifted his chin in a way that reminded Derek painfully of himself in business meetings, stubborn and proud even when scared. "She did," he said. "The lady with the brown coat and the sad eyes, the one who cries in the kitchen when she thinks I'm asleep. She said you looked right at her and said, 'He'll be better off without me.' She said you got money and freedom and I got left." Tears filled his eyes but did not fall yet, held back by anger. "Why would she lie?" he demanded. "She feeds me, she buys my clothes, she held my hand when I had a fever. Why would she lie?" The hallway felt too small, too crowded with memories and words and the ghost of every moment Derek had chosen work over bedtime stories. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to hold his son's gaze. "Sometimes people who are hurting tell stories that feel true to them even when they're not," he said slowly, searching for words simple enough for a child but strong enough to hold the weight of this moment. "I never signed anything to give you away. I never told anyone I didn't want you. When you disappeared, my whole world broke. I stopped sleeping. I stopped working. I put your picture everywhere. I walked the streets with posters just to find one person who could tell me where you were. Do you know how I'm here right now? Lee saw your picture. She told me you were living here. That's how much I've been looking for you." Mason's gaze flicked to Lee, who gave him a small, shaky nod. "He was putting up posters, Mace," she said softly. "His hands were shaking. He dropped them when I told him you were in my house. He looked like he was going to fall down." The anger in Mason's eyes did not disappear, but it wavered like a candle flame hit by a soft breath. He looked back at his father, searching his face as if trying to see if he was telling the truth or just another story meant to make the hurt stop for a minute. "Then why weren't you there?" he demanded after a long, heavy pause. "That day, when he came, the man in the hood, he said you sent him." He said, his voice cracked, and the tears that had been holding back finally spilled over, sliding down his cheeks in thin lines. "He said you were too busy to say goodbye." The words tore at Derek's heart. He wished he could reach back in time and shake his old self, drag him out of that meeting, throw his laptop out the window, sit on the floor next to his son and play with the blocks until the sun went down. But time did not work that way. All he had now were words and the truth. "I didn't send anyone," he said quietly. "If I had known, I would have stopped them. I would have protected you. I thought you were safe in our home. I should have been there. That part is my fault. I chose a meeting over a morning with you, and I am so sorry." He did not dress his apology up with fancy explanations or excuses. He let the plain words sit there, raw and bare. Because he knew children could see through polished lies better than most adults. Mason stared at him, his chest rising and falling fast, his hands still clenched around the drawing. "You're lying," he whispered, but his voice did not sound sure, it sounded scared. "If you wanted me, how come it took you so long?" Derek's own eyes filled now. He stepped closer, but just enough that he could have stopped if the boy pulled back. "Because the world is bigger and darker than I understood," he said hoarsely. "Because some people know how to disappear. Because money can buy a team of investigators and cameras and posters, but it cannot force a scared child to feel safe or a hurt woman to tell the truth. But every day that passed without you felt like I was walking with a hole in my chest. I came here as soon as I knew where you were. I'm here now, and I'm not leaving without making sure you know the truth." There was a long silence, thick and heavy. Mason looked at him, then at Carla, then at Lee, like he wanted someone to tell him what to feel. Carla spoke softly, stepping forward just a little. "Remember what I told you, Mace," she said. About how sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that cause storms for everybody even when they didn't mean to. I think your dad made a big mistake once, maybe more than once, but I also think he's been standing in the rain trying to fix it. The boy wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at his drawing at the stars he had carefully sketched. I draw the sky when I miss you, he muttered, the words slipping out before he could catch them. Derek swallowed the lump in his throat. Can I see? He asked gently. For a second it looked like Mason was going to say no, but then slowly he turned the paper around. The stars were messy, some too big, some too small, but they were drawn with care, with long lines connecting them into shapes. At the bottom of the page in crooked letters was a sentence that stabbed straight into Derek's soul. Maybe Dad can see me from the stars. Derek reached out slowly, his fingers barely brushing the edge of the paper. I couldn't see you from the stars, he whispered, but I prayed under them every night. I asked God or the universe or anyone listening to keep you breathing until I could find you. I didn't know where you were, but I never stopped being your dad, not for 1 second. Mason's lips pressed together. His small shoulders sagged like he was tired of being angry but too scared to let it go. If that's true, he said in a small voice, then why did she tell me you sold me? Derek's mind burned with questions. Why would Dana tell his son such a cruel story? Was it revenge? Was it her own broken heart twisting the truth? Had she really believed he chose money over everything, including his child? Because she's broken, he said softly. Because I hurt her once and she didn't know what to do with that pain. Sometimes when people are broken, they break other people without meaning to. That doesn't make her a monster, but it doesn't make what she did okay either. She's not a monster, Mason said quickly, defending her out of habit. She brought me here when I was scared. She stayed with me when I had a nightmare. She says she's sorry when she thinks I'm asleep. Derek nodded, the pain in his chest growing heavier. I believe you, he said. People can do kind things and wrong things at the same time. That's what makes life so hard to understand. He took a breath, feeling like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Mason, he went on carefully, if I can prove to you that I never signed anything to give you away, if I can show you that the police were looking for you, that our home is still your home, will you at least think about coming back with me? Not today if you're not ready, but someday soon. The boy opened his mouth, but before he could answer, a sound cut through the house sharp as a broken plate. The front gate squeaked. Heavy footsteps moved up the short path. The rusty latch on the front door rattled as someone tried to open it with more force than needed. Carla stiffened. Lee's eyes went wide with fear. Mason's hand crushed the drawing into a ball. She's back, he whispered, his face draining of color. Derek's heartbeat leaped, slamming against his ribs. Dana, she was here. The woman who had taken his son from the safety of their home and placed him in this small, kind house filled with both warmth and lies. The door banged open, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Carla, a woman's voice called from the living room, rough with anger and fear and something like panic. Why is that car parked outside? Whose is it? We talked about this. We can't have strangers coming here. It's not safe. The voice moved closer, each step like a drumbeat marching straight toward them. Derek's hands curled into fists before he could stop them. Part of him wanted to storm into the living room, to shout, to demand answers, to ask her how she could look at a scared little boy and tell him he was unwanted. But another part of him, the part that had listened to Carla's warning, knew that if he exploded now, he might shatter what little trust his son was just starting to feel. Carla stepped in front of him instinctively, her arms spread out a little like she was trying to shield him and the children at the same time. Stay here, she whispered sharply. Do not go out there yet, let me talk to her first. Without waiting for an answer, she walked quickly back into the living room, her back straight, her shoulders tense. Derek could hear the murmur of voices but not the words at first. Lee slipped her hand into Mason's, squeezing tight. It's okay, she whispered. You're not alone this time. Mason didn't answer, but he didn't pull his hand away either. Derek leaned closer to the half-open bedroom door, straining to hear. You lied to me, Carla's voice suddenly rang out, louder now. You told me his father didn't want him, you told me no one was looking, but he is here. He has been looking for his son every day. How could you do that to a child? Another voice answered, shaking but sharp, the voice of someone whose pain had turned into a knife they carried everywhere. You don't understand, Dana said. You don't know what that man did to me. You don't know what it feels like to give everything to someone and be thrown away like trash. He had a choice. He chose his towers. He chose his perfect life. Don't talk to me about what's fair. This is not about you anymore, Carla shot back. This is about a little boy who wakes up at night asking if he was traded like a used car. Whatever that man did to you, you had no right to poison his son against him. Derek's jaw clenched. He could picture Dana in his mind now, the tired eyes, the thin shoulders, the hair pulled back in a way that tried to look neat but couldn't hide the exhaustion. He remembered the last day he saw her in the office. How she had begged him to stand up for her when the board blamed her for a mistake in a deal he had pushed them into rushing. He had told himself he was only protecting the company. He had told himself she would find another job. He had not thought about what his silence sounded like to her heart. Maybe to her it had sounded like, "You are disposable. If you call the police," Dana's voice said now, crackling with panic, "they'll take him away from all of us. Do you understand? They'll put him in some system. He'll end up with strangers who don't care about him. He's safe here. Why can't you just let things stay the way they are?" "Because it's not the truth," Carla said firmly. "And I won't build my home on lies." Footsteps moved. A chair scraped. Derek could not wait any longer. He stepped out of the bedroom into the hallway, his heart pounding so loud he barely heard his own voice when he said, "Neither will I." The room went silent. When he stepped into the living room, he saw her. Dana stood near the door, her brown coat clutched around her like armor even though it was warm inside, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands escaping around her face. Her eyes landed on him, and for a moment her anger blew out like a candle in the wind, leaving only shock and raw, open pain. "You," she breathed. "You weren't supposed to be here, not like this." Derek looked at her, really looked, seeing not just the woman who had taken his child but the woman who had once worked beside him, laughed at his jokes, brought him coffee on days when he forgot to eat, and then walked out of his building carrying a cardboard box of her things while he stared at his phone instead of at her. "I should have been there a long time ago," he said quietly. "I should have been there the day you were standing in my office asking me to believe you. I should have been there the day my son needed me, but I'm here now and we're going to fix this for him." Dana's eyes filled with tears, but they hardened quickly like water turning to ice. "You can't fix everything with a speech, Derek," she snapped, her voice breaking on his name. "You can't sign a few papers, move a few numbers around, and make people forget they were thrown away." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can start by not throwing him away again." In that moment, a small figure stepped into the doorway behind him. Mason stood there, his crumpled drawing still in his hand, his eyes wide as he looked from his father to the woman who had told him the terrible story about deals and trades. "You told me he sold me," he whispered to Dana, his voice trembling. "You told me he didn't want me." Dana turned toward him, and all the anger in her face melted into pure sorrow. "I was hurt, baby," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "I was so hurt I couldn't see straight. I thought he would never come for you. I thought he would just go back to his meetings and his money and forget. I didn't want you to wait for someone who wasn't coming. I thought I was protecting you." "By lying," Carla said, her voice tight. "By stealing him from his bed." Dana spun to face her. "You think they would have left him with me if I told them I was the one who took him?" she cried. "You think they wouldn't have thrown me in jail or worse? I knew how this would look. I knew I had no right. But I also knew what it felt like to be in that house, invisible, waiting for him to notice I was drowning. I couldn't stand the idea of another child growing up in the shadow of his buildings, wondering if he mattered as much as the next contract." Derek felt the weight of her words like stones placed one by one on his shoulders. He had never seen himself as a monster. He had thought of himself as a man doing what he had to do to give his son a good life. But now he was hearing the story from the other side, from the people whose lives had been bent by his choices like branches forced to grow around a wall. "You had no right to decide what kind of father I would be," he said quietly. "You had no right to decide my son's story without me in it." "Someone had to decide something," she shot back. "You never decide when it comes to people, only projects, only buildings." The room felt like a storm waiting to break. Lee clung to the side of the couch, her eyes moving back and forth between the adults. Carla stood with her hands on her hips, her jaw clenched, caught between loyalty to the woman who had brought the child to her and the man who had come to claim him. And in the middle of it all stood Mason, his small face twisted with a pain no child should have to carry. "Stop," he suddenly shouted, his voice cracking. Everyone turned to him. "Just stop. I don't care who is hurt, I don't care who is angry, I just want to know one thing." He turned to Derek, his eyes burning. "If I go with you, are you going to leave me alone again? Are you going to pick your building over me again, or are you going to be there when I wake up?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Derek felt every eye in the room on him, waiting. He thought about his office, about the glass walls, about the emails piling up, about the investors who were probably already whispering that he had lost his edge. Then he thought about the nights he had spent walking through his empty penthouse, touching toys that were never touched, staring at a bed that stayed cold. He knew his answer, but he also knew that this time words would not be enough. "I can't promise I'll never make a mistake again," he said slowly, kneeling down so he was at eye level with his son. "But I can promise you this. I am done living like work is my only family. If you come home with me, I will change my life to fit you, not the other way around. I'll step down from projects if I have to. I'll fire people who think my time with you is a waste. I'll show you, not just tell you, that you come first." He took a breath, then added quietly, "And if you want, we can even move out of that big glass house that scares you now and find somewhere that feels safe to you. Somewhere with less echo and more real laughter." The room was completely silent. Even the pot on the stove seemed to have stopped bubbling. Mason's eyes searched his father's face, looking for cracks, for signs that this was just another promise that would be forgotten as soon as an important email came in. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then took a tiny step closer. Just as he did, a sudden loud knock exploded against the front door, making everyone jump. Another knock followed, harder this time. "Police!" a strong voice called from outside. "Open up, we have questions about a missing child report." Carla's face went pale. Dana's eyes flew to the window like a trapped animal. Mason gasped, dropping his drawing. The paper fell to the floor, the stars and the words, "Maybe Dad can see me from the stars," staring up at all of them. Derek's heart raced. He had not called the police since walking in. That meant they were still out there somewhere, still looking, still following leads. Maybe someone had seen him come into the house with Lee. Maybe a neighbor had recognized the boy from the posters. Maybe this was the moment everything would spin out of their control. Dana grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "If they think I took him," she whispered, panic rising in her voice, "they'll take him away from all of us. They'll never let me see him again. They'll never let you see him if they think you were part of it." The knocking grew louder, more impatient. "Open the door," the voice commanded. Derek looked at his son, at the fear in his eyes, at the woman who had hurt him but also held him when he cried, at the woman who had sheltered him, at the little girl who had been brave enough to tell the truth in the middle of the street. He realized that whatever he did next would decide not only his future with his son, but also what kind of man he truly was. He stepped toward the door, feeling the weight of every choice he had made pressing on his shoulders. But just as his hand reached out for the handle, Mason's small fingers grabbed his sleeve tightly. "Dad," the boy whispered, his voice shaking, "please don't let them take me somewhere else. Please don't let them make me go with strangers." Derek turned back to him, his heart breaking all over again. Behind them, the pounding on the door came one last time, louder than ever, as the voice outside shouted, "This is your final warning. Open the door now or we'll come in." Derek knew he had only seconds to decide whether to open that door and face every consequence, or try to hide what had happened and risk losing his son in a different way. With the police outside, his terrified child clinging to his sleeve, and two women whose lives were tangled with his in a knot of guilt, love, and lies, he had to choose whose truth would be told first. And the next words out of his mouth would change everything. The pounding on the door seemed to shake the tiny house, and for a moment it felt like the walls were breathing with them, in and out, hearts racing in the same scared rhythm as Derek stood there with his hand on the handle, his son clinging to his sleeve, Carla and Lee frozen in the living room, and Dana staring at the door like it was a monster come to drag her into the dark. And in that tight second he understood that whatever he chose would not just change his own life. It would change the lives of every person in that room, so he took a deep, shaking breath, bent down, and put his hand over Mason's small fingers. "Look at me," he said softly, even though the police were still shouting from outside. "I am your dad. I am not going to let anyone take you away to strangers. No matter what happens, I will fight for you, I promise." Mason's eyes were round with fear, but he nodded, gripping his sleeve even tighter as if those words were the only thing stopping him from falling through the floor. Derek straightened, turned toward the door, and in one clear motion pulled it open. Two officers stood on the porch, one tall man with a serious face and a short woman with sharp eyes and a notebook already in her hand. Behind them, a police car's lights flashed softly without the siren, washing the street in little bursts of red and blue that made the old houses look even smaller. The tall officer's gaze went straight to Derek's face, then down to the posters still crumpled under his arm, then past him into the house. "Mr. Cole," he asked, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'm Officer Hart. This is Officer Rivera. We're here about your missing child. We got a call that someone matching his description might be at this address." Derek nodded slowly, every muscle in his body tight. "He is here," he said, not trying to hide it, not trying to twist the truth. "My son is here. I found him, and I am not going to run or hide anything from you. But please, before anything else, remember there's a scared little boy inside who has already been through too much." Officer Rivera's eyes softened for a moment, but her expression stayed professional. "We just want to make sure he's safe," she said. "May we come in?" Derek stepped aside and motioned them in. Carla's heart looked like it was beating in her throat, but she crouched down beside Lee and put an arm around her, whispering something in her ear that sounded like a promise that everything would be okay, even if she was not sure yet if that was true. Dana stayed standing near the table, her hands twisting the edge of her coat, her eyes following the officers like a cornered animal watching hunters. Mason pressed himself against his father's side, half hidden behind him. The officers stepped into the living room and looked around quickly, taking in the small couch, the simple table, the steaming pot on the stove, the family pictures on the wall. Their eyes found Mason next. Officer Hart's face softened just a little when he saw the boy's wet cheeks and messy hair. "Hey there," he said in a calm, quiet voice, like he was talking to someone's little brother instead of a child from a headline. "You must be Mason." Mason tightened his grip on Derek but nodded. Are you okay? Officer Hart asked gently. Has anyone hurt you? Mason shook his head but his voice came out small and shaky. I don't want to go with strangers, he whispered. Please don't take me away. That sentence hit everyone in the room like a hammer. Officer Rivera glanced at Derek, then at Carla, then at Dana, reading the tension in the air like a book. No one is taking you anywhere right now, she said, keeping her voice soft. We just need to understand what happened. We want to help you and make sure you're safe. That's our job. Derek forced himself to breathe slowly. You can ask me anything, he said to the officers. You can ask them anything, but please let him stay in the room with someone he trusts while we talk so he knows we're not sending him away behind his back. Carla cleared her throat and stood a little straighter. He can sit with me and Lee, she offered, her voice calm even though her hands still shook. He knows us, we've been taking care of him. Mason looked up at his dad, waiting for a sign. Derek nodded. It's okay, he said softly. Sit with them, all right? I'm not going anywhere. Slowly, like his feet were made of lead, Mason moved to the couch and sat down between Carla and Lee. Lee slipped her small hand into his, giving him a tiny, brave smile. We're right here, she whispered. We're not letting go. Officer Rivera stood near them, keeping them in sight but focusing her questions elsewhere for now, her notebook ready. Officer Hart motioned Derek and Dana a few steps away, still in the same room but with a little space to speak. We've seen the footage from your building, Mr. Cole, he said. The person who took your son from your apartment was wearing a hoodie, face covered. We couldn't identify them. We need to know who brought him here, who has been keeping him, and why the police weren't contacted when he showed up. Dana flinched like each word was a slap. Derek glanced at her, then back at the officer. She brought him, he said, refusing to lie even though his chest felt like it was cracking open. Her name is Dana. She used to work for me, but I need you to know something. She didn't hurt him. She gave him a place to sleep, food to eat. She kept him alive. What she did was wrong, but it's not all simple black and white. Officer Hart's eyes moved to Dana. Is that true? He asked. Did you take this boy from his penthouse and bring him here? Dana swallowed hard, her throat working. It's not how you think, she said, her voice strained. I didn't just walk into his perfect life and grab him like some movie villain. I didn't even go into that building that day. The room went quiet. Even the children stopped whispering. Derek frowned, confusion cutting through his anger like a sudden wind. What do you mean you didn't go in? He asked slowly. We saw the video. Someone went into my home and let him out. You told Carla it was you who brought him. You told him I sold him. How is that not you? Tears welled in Dana's eyes, spilling over as she let out a broken laugh that held no joy. Of course you think it was all me, she said softly. You always think in straight lines. Problem, solution, blame. But that's not what happened. Officer Rivera stepped closer now, her pen hovering above the page. Then tell us what did happen, she said. Right now, no half-truths, no missing pieces, because if there was someone else involved, we need to know. Dana wrapped her coat tighter around herself like she was trying to keep her heart from falling out. After I lost my job at his company, she began, her eyes locked on a spot on the floor, I tried to move on. I tried to find new work, a new life. But doors kept closing. People in that circle talk, they whisper, one mistake follows you everywhere. I went from running meetings in glass offices to cleaning hotel rooms at night. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. I cared so much it hurt to breathe. Then one evening I ran into someone from the old building. Derek's stomach dropped as she went on. His name is Victor, she said. He used to work in security. You barely noticed him, Derek. He was the one you walked past in the lobby without seeing. But he saw everything. He saw how your world worked. He heard things. He knew you were always one step away from some big deal or some big fall. He told me he had a way to get back at you and help me at the same time. Derek tried to remember the security staff, the nameless faces in dark uniforms, the ones who opened doors and checked IDs. A tall guy with a shaved head, a man with a tattoo on his neck, the details blurred. They had all just been staff to him. People who kept the machine running while he focused on the gears he thought mattered. He said he could shake your world, Dana continued, her voice trembling, make you feel what it's like to lose control. He joked that men like you only wake up when something hits them where it hurts most. I told him I just wanted you to see that you had broken my life. I didn't want this. She gestured toward Mason. I didn't want a child in the middle, but he knew how much you loved that boy. Everyone in that building did. They saw the way your face changed when he called you. They knew he was your weak spot. Officer Hart's mouth tightened. Are you telling us this man planned the kidnapping? He asked. And you went along with it? Dana shook her head fast, almost too fast. No, at least not like that, she said quickly. He said he would scare you, make you late, make you miss something important. He said maybe he would keep the kid away for a day or two, send a message, then bring him back and use the fear to make you pay for what you did to people like us. I told him it was a bad idea, that you would call the police, that it would ruin everything, but I was so angry, I was so tired of feeling small and invisible. I didn't say yes and I didn't say no, I just didn't stop him. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of her own words. When the news broke that the boy was missing and you were on TV begging for help, I realized he hadn't just played a prank or sent a message. He had really taken him. I panicked. I called him. I yelled. I cried. I begged him to bring the boy back. He said it was too late, that the police were watching everything, that he had to hide. Officer Rivera scribbled quickly in her notebook. Where is he now? She asked. Do you know where this Victor person is? Dana shook her head. I haven't seen him in weeks, she said. The last time we met he was jumpy, like he was listening for footsteps in empty rooms. He said he was done, that things had got too big. He asked me to do one thing for him. He told me where the boy was, said he had left him in a parking lot near a quiet street, sitting in the back of a car with the door unlocked. He told me to go pick him up, to fix it before things got worse. Her voice broke. When I got there, Mason was curled up in the back seat, clutching his stuffed bear and shaking. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't take him to some cold police building and watch strangers pull him away. So I brought him here. I told Carla he needed a safe place. I told him you didn't want him because I was scared that if he knew you were looking, he'd run back to you, and then everything we had done would come out and they would throw me in jail and maybe even blame Carla too. I thought if he believed no one was coming, he would stop asking to go home and just leave. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with shock and hurt and the weight of every bad decision piled on top of another. Derek stared at her, his chest tight. So you didn't walk into my home, he said slowly, but you knew who did. You knew where he left my son. You chose to keep him from me, to twist the story, to make him think I traded him like a thing I could buy back later. Dana's tears fell freely now. Yes, she whispered. I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I can't breathe, but I loved him. I still love him. I tried to be a good stand-in for a father I thought had given up. Mason's small voice cut through the room like a thin, sharp line. You promised you wouldn't lie to me, he whispered from the couch, his eyes shining with fresh tears. You said you knew what it felt like to be left. You said you would never do that to me, but you did. You left me in a story that wasn't true. Dana turned to him, taking a tiny step forward. I know, she said, her voice breaking, and I would do anything to change it. I thought I was protecting your heart from a bigger hurt, but I see now that I became part of the hurt. Officer Hart cleared his throat, bringing the focus back to the law that sat quietly under all this pain. Ms. Dana, he said, his tone more formal again, you understand that withholding a child from his legal parent, lying about his safety, and not reporting his location is a serious crime, even if you did not carry out the first part of the kidnapping yourself. She nodded slowly, resigned. I know, she said. I've known since the moment I saw his face on the news. Carla stepped forward quickly, her eyes fierce. But you also need to understand something, she said to the officers. If she had not gone to get that boy from that car, he would have spent the night alone in a dark parking lot. If she had not brought him to my door, I would never have known to fold that blanket and cook extra rice and make space in our tiny home. She is guilty of many things, but she also kept him breathing when the man who took him disappeared. Officer Rivera looked at Derek. What do you want to happen, Mr. Cole? She asked. We will follow the law. We will file our report. The courts will make decisions, but right now your voice matters. You can push this to the harshest level, or you can tell us you want the full story considered. Derek looked at his son, at the way he held Lee's hand like it was an anchor, at the way he leaned slightly toward Carla as if her presence was now stitched into the idea of safety in his mind. He looked at Dana, at the guilt and fear and love all tangled in her eyes. He thought about Victor, the security man he had barely noticed, the one who had felt so small in his world of steel and glass that he had decided to hit the only place he thought would make the giant bend. He realized this wasn't just about one wrong act, it was about the chain of choices that had led here. I want my son safe, he said quietly. That comes first. I want the man who came into my home and took him caught and stopped so he can never do it to another child. As for her. He looked at Dana again. She broke my heart in a different way. She broke his. She has to face what she did, but I also see that my own choices lit part of the fire inside her. I don't want to pretend it's all her fault just so I can feel clean. Officer Hart nodded slowly. We'll put everything you've said into our report, he said. For now, this is what's going to happen. We need all of you to come down to the station to give formal statements. We need to contact child services so they can be involved because that's the law in cases like this. But that does not mean your son is being taken away forever. It means they will look at where he should be in the short term and what support the family needs. Understand? At the words child services, Mason flinched and looked at his dad in panic. I don't want to go with strangers, he repeated, his voice shaking harder now. Derek crossed the room in 2 quick steps and knelt in front of him, taking both of his hands. Listen to me, he said, looking right into his son's eyes. I am going with you. I am not letting you walk into any building without me by your side. If they say you have to stay somewhere for a little while, I will stay as close as they let me. I am not going to disappear again. Do you understand? Mason swallowed and nodded, though his eyes were still full of fear. Can they make me choose? He asked in a small voice. Between you and them, He looked at Carla, at Lee, even at Dana, as if the idea of being torn apart again was too much to even picture. Derek's heart squeezed. "No one is asking you to choose who you love," he said. "Love isn't a test you pass or fail. We're going to tell the truth about everything. And we're going to ask for something new, something better. We're going to ask them to see that you have more than one person who cares about you." That idea hung in the air, strange and hopeful and scary at the same time. The officers gave them a few minutes to gather themselves. Carla turned off the stove, covered the pot, and quickly packed a small bag for Mason with a change of clothes and the stuffed bear he slept with. Lee ran into the small bedroom and came back with the crumpled star drawing, smoothing it as best as she could before pressing it into Mason's hands. "Don't forget this," she said. "If you are scared, look at it and remember that the sky is bigger than all of this." He gave her a tiny, grateful smile. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his voice soft. Lee glanced at the adults, then back at him. "You better," she said, trying to sound brave. "You still owe me a rematch in that board game." Outside, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, watching as the little group walked toward the police car. The rich man from the news with his wrinkled shirt and tired face, the small boy clutching a bear and a drawing, the woman in the brown coat with tears on her cheeks, the nurse-looking woman with strong eyes, and the little girl who had spoken the truth on the street. The ride to the station felt both long and too short. Mason sat between Derek and Carla in the back of one car, gripping both their hands. Dana rode in the other car with Officer Rivera, not handcuffed yet but clearly not free. At the station, bright lights and hard chairs waited for them. The air smelled like coffee and paper and something sharp like worry. Child Services sent a worker named Ms. Lane, a calm woman with warm eyes and a notebook. She knelt to Mason's level right away and spoke to him like he was a person, not a file. "I know this is a lot," she said gently, "but I am here to listen to you. You have a voice. You get to tell us how you feel and what you want. We don't just listen to adults, okay?" Mason nodded, a little surprised. He clung to his bear as she asked simple questions about where he had been staying, who had made him feel safe, who had made him feel scared. He told her about the night in the car, about Dana's shaking hands when she buckled him into a different seat, about Carla's warm meals, about Lee sharing her blanket when he had cold feet. He talked about his dad's empty chair at breakfast, about the posters on the street, about the moment when two feelings crashed inside him at once when he saw his father in the hallway, joy and anger, light and shadow. Ms. Lane listened without rushing, writing down notes but never breaking eye contact for long. When it was Derek's turn, he sat in a small room with Officer Hart and Ms. Lane. He told them everything from his side, leaving nothing out, not the night he chose a meeting over time with his son, not the way he had cut Dana out to protect his company, not the weeks he had walked past people on the street with posters in his hand asking for help. It was not easy to say those words out loud. He felt like he was peeling off layers of armor he had worn for years, standing bare and cold in front of strangers. But each time he looked at the tiny chair by the wall where Mason had sat before, he remembered why he was doing it. Dana was taken to a different room. She gave her own statement, voice breaking at times when she had to speak about her loneliness, her anger, her bad choices, and the shadowy man named Victor who had slipped in and out of her life like smoke. Officers made calls, sent messages, pulled up files. They found a record of Victor leaving his job a few months before the kidnapping, complaining about rich people who think they own the world. They found security footage from the parking lot where Dana said she had picked up Mason, and there he was on the grainy video, a tall figure in a hoodie opening the back door of a car, guiding a small boy inside, then walking away without looking back. It matched the shape and walk of the man in the building footage. The pieces of the puzzle began to form a clearer picture. But the law still had to move in its slow, careful way. After hours of questions and waiting and more questions, Ms. Lane sat down with Derek alone. Her notepad was full now. "Here is the situation," she said calmly, though there was care in her eyes. "Right now Mason is still legally your child, that has never changed. But the system needs to make sure we are not sending him back into a situation that might be unsafe, not just from strangers but from old patterns. You have been honest today, and that counts for a lot. You have also taken responsibility for your choices, that matters. However, because he has been living with another family and has formed attachments there, we can't just snap our fingers and pretend the last months didn't happen. The court will almost certainly get involved to set a clear plan." Derek nodded slowly, ready to face whatever storm was coming as long as it had his son at the end of it. "What does that mean right now?" he asked. "Tonight, tomorrow," Ms. Lane looked at her notes, then back at him. "Mason will go home with you tonight," she said. "You have that right. And we do not see any reason to block it in the short term. But we will also set a hearing very soon, where a judge will listen to everyone, including Mason if he feels ready, and decide on a longer plan. That plan may include supervised visits for Dana, and possibly ongoing contact with Carla and Lee if the court sees that is healthy for him. It may also include checks on how you adjust your work life to be present for him. Relief and fear washed through Derek at the same time. He would not lose his son tonight, but the future was no longer something he could control with a phone call or a contract. It would be decided in a room he did not own. "What about her?" he asked quietly, looking toward the door of the room where Dana sat. "Will she go to prison?" Ms. Lane sighed softly. "The police will pass her case to the prosecutor," she said. "They will consider that she did not plan the first part of the kidnapping, that she did rescue the child from a dangerous situation, but also that she hid him and lied. There may be a plea deal. There may be community service, counseling, maybe some time in custody. It is too early to say, but your voice at the hearing and even at her case if you choose to speak will matter." Derek thought of Mason's words on the couch. "You said you would never leave me." He thought of how the boy had looked at Dana, hurt and betrayed, but still full of a sad kind of love. "I don't want him to grow up thinking the world is only made of enemies and punishment," Derek said softly. "I want him to learn about justice and mercy both. If I get a chance to speak, I will tell them the full story, the good and the bad." As the sun slid lower outside and the lights in the station got harsher, they finally let Mason and Derek stand together in a quiet hallway. The boy's face was tired, his eyes red, but there was a strange calm in him now, like a storm that had raged so long it was finally running out of rain. "So I'm going home with you," he said slowly, testing the words. "To the tall house." Derek knelt down and smiled, a real smile this time, full of hope and fear mixed together. "Yes," he said, "but it won't be like before. Things are going to change. I've already called my office and told them I'm taking a break. A real break, not just a weekend. I'm going to be home for dinners, for bedtime stories, for school mornings, and we're going to talk, you and me, about everything. I won't hide hard things from you anymore." Mason looked at him for a long moment, then took a small breath. "Can we invite them sometimes?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Carla and Lee, and maybe her if they let her." Derek felt his throat tight. "I would like that," he said honestly. "If the judge agrees and if you still want it when the time comes, we can make space at our table. We can add more chairs. Home doesn't have to be just two people in a big empty place." Mason's mouth twitched into the smallest smile. "Lee talks a lot," he said. "The house won't be quiet if she's there." Derek laughed softly. "Good," he said. "I think we've had enough quiet to last a lifetime." That night, under a sky full of real stars, father and son rode home together in a car that felt less like a private driver and more like a second chance wrapped in metal and glass. Mason leaned his head against the window, his bear tucked under one arm, his drawing of the stars under the other. "Do you think they can see us?" he asked softly, looking up at the sky. "The people who are gone, the ones we hurt, and the ones who hurt us." Derek looked up too at the lights far above and thought of all the people whose stories had tangled with his own. "Maybe not with eyes," he said, "but I think every good choice we make sends a kind of light up there. And every time we tell the truth instead of hiding, it makes the sky a tiny bit brighter." When they reached the tall building with his name on it, Derek did something he had never done before. He stood on the sidewalk, looked up at the shining letters, and said out loud, "You are not the most important thing in my life anymore." Then he took his son's hand and walked inside, past guards who now looked at him with new respect, not because of his money, but because they had seen him on the news searching like a man who had finally learned what mattered. Upstairs, the penthouse felt different when they stepped in. The silence was still there, but it did not feel as deep. Mason walked slowly from room to room, touching the couch, the table, the toys lined up on the shelf. He paused at his bed, at the rocket blanket still smoothed out as if waiting for him. "You didn't change anything," he said quietly. "I couldn't," Derek answered. "It hurt too much, but now I'm glad I didn't. It means we have something to start from." That night, for the first time in months, Mason lay in his own bed while Derek sat on the edge, telling him a story about a boy who sailed between stars on a ship made of light. He stumbled over some parts, not because the story was hard, but because his heart was so full. When Mason finally fell asleep, his hand still on the drawing of the stars, Derek sat there a little longer, watching his chest rise and fall, listening to the small, quiet breaths that meant hope was alive. He knew this was not the end of their struggle. Tomorrow there would be calls from lawyers, dates from the court, questions from the board of his company, news reports asking why the rich man had left his office chair empty. There would be a hearing where a judge would look at all of them and decide what kind of future Mason would have, who could see him when and how often. As he stepped out of the room and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it open just a crack so the hallway light could slip in, his phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. The court date had already been set sooner than he expected. In just a few days he would stand in front of a judge, not as a powerful owner of tall towers, but as a man asking for another chance to be a father. He looked back at the thin slice of light on his son's face and whispered, "I won't fail you again." What he did not know was that on that same night, in a small, cold room of another part of the city, a familiar shadow was packing a bag in a hurry. Victor, the former security guard, glanced at a news report playing on a tiny old TV. He froze when he saw Derek and Mason walking into the building together, the headline flashing. Missing boy found secret stay with family raises questiones. His jaw tightened. So the rich man got him back, he muttered. Let's see how long that happy picture lasts when the rest comes out. He turned off the TV, grabbed his bag, and walked toward the door. On a table by the wall lay a folder stuffed with papers, photos of other rich children in front of gates and schools, and one particular document with Derek's company's logo on it and a circle around a line that read "High-Risk Project." He slid the folder into his bag and stepped into the dark hallway, a thin smile on his face. The game, for him, was not over. As the night wrapped the city, one father prepared for a court fight, one woman sat in a small cell hugging her knees, one nurse tucked her daughter into bed and prayed for a child who was not hers by blood, and one angry man walked into the shadows with a new plan. None of them knew that in the courtroom where their paths would cross again, a secret buried in those company papers would be revealed. A secret that could either prove Derek had changed for real or show that his towers were still built on the pain of people like Victor and Dana. And when that secret came out, someone in that room would stand up and say something no one expected, turning the whole case upside down in front of the judge. The morning of the court hearing came faster than anyone expected, and as the sun rose over the city, turning the glass buildings gold, Derek stood in front of his bathroom mirror with a tie in his hands and his heart beating so loud it felt like it was in his throat. Because this was not just another important meeting, not a business presentation where numbers and charts could save him. This was the day when a judge would look at him, look at his past, look at his son, and decide if he deserved a second chance as a father, and no amount of money could buy the right answer. He had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting on the floor beside Mason's bed, listening to his soft breathing, feeling that strange mix of joy and fear every time the boy turned over and held his bear tighter. And once in the middle of the night, Mason had woken up and whispered, "You're still here," like he was checking if his new reality would disappear like a dream. And Derek had answered, "I'm not going anywhere," meaning it with every tired bone in his body. Now as he tried to tie his tie, his fingers fumbled, and after the third attempt ended in a crooked knot, he let out a shaky laugh and dropped his hands, realizing he had spent years dressing perfectly for people who didn't matter as much as the small boy still asleep in the next room. "Forget it," he muttered, pulling the tie off completely and leaving the top button of his shirt open, looking somehow more like himself and less like the cold man from the news. In the kitchen, he made breakfast the way he promised he would, even though the eggs were slightly overcooked and the toast was a little too dark. When Mason shuffled in, rubbing his eyes and dragging his bear by one arm, he blinked in surprise at the sight of his father at the stove instead of a chef. "You cooked?" he asked, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Kind of," Derek replied with a small smile, sliding a plate in front of him. "Eat what you can. Today is a big day, and I don't want you going into court on an empty stomach. That's a rule now, big feelings, big days, big breakfast." Mason took a bite and chewed slowly, watching his dad like he was trying to learn his face all over again. "Are you scared?" he asked quietly after a moment. Derek thought about lying, about saying something brave like "of course not," but he had promised no more half-truths. "Yes," he said honestly, "I am scared. I don't know exactly what the judge will say. But I know what I am going to say. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell them I want to be your dad in the right way this time, even if that means they make me change everything about how I live. And whatever happens, we'll face it together." That word "together" seemed to wrap around Mason like a blanket. He took another bite of toast and nodded slowly. "Can I talk too?" he asked. "If they let me," Derek swallowed. "Only if you want to," he answered gently. "But yes, sometimes judges listen to kids, especially when they're as brave as you." A short time later, they met Ms. Lane outside the courthouse, a tall building of stone and glass that felt very different from the towers with Derek's name on them. It was older, heavier, like it had seen many stories before theirs. Carla and Lee were already there, standing near the steps. Carla wore her best dress, a simple dark blue one with a neat collar, and held a small envelope in her hand. Lee had her hair in two tight braids and clutched a little notebook, as if she had come prepared to take notes on grown-up behavior. When Mason saw them, his face lit up in a way that made Ms. Lane smile. He rushed down the steps to hug Lee, and she hugged him back so hard his bear almost slipped out of his other hand. "You look like a real lawyer," she said seriously, eyeing his neat shirt and small shoes. "You look like you're going to tell them what to do." Don't know about that, he replied, but his shoulders straightened a little. Carla stepped forward and squeezed Derek's arm gently. How are you holding up, she asked. Like a man who knows his whole life is about to be weighed on a scale, he admitted with a tired smile. Thank you for coming. We wouldn't stay away, she said. No matter what happens, he's part of our hearts now. We're here to say that out loud if they ask. Just then, a police van pulled up to the side entrance and Derek's chest tightened. Dana stepped out, escorted by two officers not in handcuffs but still clearly under watch. She wore simple clothes, her hair braided back, her face pale. When she saw Mason standing with Derek, Carla, and Lee, she stopped for a moment, something like relief and sorrow mixed in her eyes. She raised one hand in a small, shaky wave. Mason hesitated, then lifted his hand too, his wave just as small, his eyes filled with complicated feelings that were too big for his age. Do I hate her? He whispered suddenly to his dad as they turned to go inside. I feel like I should, but I don't. Derek bent down so their heads were close. You don't have to feel anything you think you should, he said quietly. You just have to be honest about what you do feel. It's okay to love someone and be angry at them at the same time. Inside the courtroom, everything felt both too big and too small at once. The ceiling was high, the walls were plain, the wooden benches hard. People whispered in low voices, papers rustled, and the sound of shoes on the floor echoed. At the front, the judge's bench stood above everything else, waiting. When the judge finally entered, a woman with gray-streaked hair and steady eyes, the room rose and then sat together like a wave. She glanced at the file in front of her, then at the faces in the room. This is the case of Mason Cole, she said in a calm, clear voice. We are here to determine his custody arrangement, to review allegations related to his disappearance, and to decide on temporary and long-term measures in his best interest. I want everyone to remember something very important. This is not about punishing adults first. This is about protecting a child. Those words seemed to settle over the room like a promise. Lawyers spoke first. Derek's lawyer explained the timeline from his side, the kidnapping, the search, the discovery in Carla's house, the statements at the station. The prosecutor explained the charges against Dana and mentioned the ongoing investigation into the missing security guard named Victor. Then it was time to hear from the people who had lived the story, not just read it on paper. Ms. Lane spoke about her meetings with Mason, about his bond with his father, his fear of being torn between the people he loved, his clear attachment to Carla and Lee, and even his confusing but real care for Dana. She recommended, in simple, careful words, that the court consider giving Derek primary custody but also acknowledge the important role the other women had played. Carla took the stand next, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She told the judge how Dana had brought a scared little boy to her door, how she had cooked extra food and made space in her small house, how she had tried again and again to convince Dana to tell the truth, how she had known in her gut that the story about the father who didn't care didn't match the way the boy cried at night. I'm a nurse, Your Honor, she said quietly. I see all kinds of hurt every day. When I looked at that child, I didn't see someone nobody wanted. I saw a heart that still believed his dad loved him, no matter what he had been told. I'm not here to take him away from his father. I'm here to say that children need more than one safe place. If you can find a way for him to keep us in his life without tearing him apart, I think he will stand straighter in this world. Lee could not officially testify, but the judge, looking at her kind eyes and tight braids, asked her one gentle question anyway. Young lady, she said, are you Mason's friend? Lee nodded, her eyes big. Yes, ma'am, she said. And if you let him stay with his dad, can he still play board games at your house sometimes? The judge asked, a tiny smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Lee nodded hard. I'll save his favorite seat, she answered, making a few people in the courtroom chuckle softly. Then came Dana's turn. She walked slowly to the stand, sat down, and took a deep breath that shook in her chest. Her lawyer had told her to stay calm, to stick to the facts, to show remorse without drowning in it. But when she looked over and saw Mason sitting next to Derek, his feet not quite touching the floor, his bear on his lap, all the rehearsed sentences ran away from her. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling, I know what I did was wrong. There is no smart way to spin it. I did not go into that building and take him from his bed. But when I found out he had been taken, I made choices that hurt him. I kept him away from his father. I lied to him. I told myself I was protecting his heart from a bigger hurt, but I see now that I just wrapped the hurt in another layer of pain. She told the story of losing her job, of feeling invisible, of listening to Victor's bitter words, of standing in that parking lot and finding Mason alone in the back of a car, shivering and crying, calling for a father who did not know where he was. I couldn't leave him, she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. But instead of doing the right thing and calling the police, I let my anger and fear drive me. I am ready to accept whatever punishment the law thinks is right. I only ask for one small mercy. If there is ever a time in the future when he is old enough and strong enough and wants to see me, please don't block it because of me. Let that be his choice, not my sentence." When she stepped down, the room was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not empty. Finally, it was Derek's turn. He walked to the stand, feeling like every step took him across the long, painful distance from who he had been to who he was trying to become. He sat, swore to tell the truth, and then looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low but steady, "I have spent most of my life building things, buildings, companies, deals I thought that made me strong, successful, in control. But when my son disappeared, I learned how weak all of that really is. I learned that without him, every floor of my tallest tower was just empty air." He talked about the morning of the kidnapping, how he had chosen a meeting over time with his boy, thinking he could make it up later, not knowing there would be no later that day. He admitted his selfishness, his blindness, the way he had let work steal moments that could never be brought back. He spoke about Dana, about how he had failed her as a boss, and as a human being when he did not stand up for her, how he now saw that his silence had helped push her into a place where anger made sense to her. "I am not saying this to excuse her choices," he said carefully. "She is responsible for what she did, but I am also responsible for the environment that hurt her. For years, my company made decisions that valued money over people. We cut corners, we pushed deadlines, we treated staff like parts that could be replaced. That doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but it shows up here in this room where one of those broken hearts is sitting in front of you." The judge watched him closely. "Are you telling me there were other harms caused by your company's choices?" she asked, her voice sharper now. This was the moment Derek had been dreading and preparing for all night. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, the very same type Victor had been stuffing into his bag on that dark evening. "Yes," he said simply. "I did some reading after I left the station. I asked my team to pull every complaint, every safety report, every case we settled quietly." One file stood out. A complaint from a few years ago about a structural failure in one of our older buildings. A piece of falling equipment in an underground parking lot. A security guard injured, a child who was hurt. The room stilled. He opened the folder and slid a copy of the document to the judge's clerk, who handed it up. "The guard's name was listed as Victor Hales," Derek continued. "He got a payout, the company avoided a lawsuit, the file was stamped resolved and put away. I never met him. I never saw the medical reports of his daughter, who was there that day and suffered a head injury. She survived, but with lasting problems. He blamed us for that. He was right to be angry, and I never even knew his name until this week." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge read quickly, her face tightening. "Are you saying the man who helped take your son was also a victim of your company's negligence?" she asked. "And no one told you?" "I am saying something worse," Derek replied softly. "I am saying I did not ask. I let other people handle the mess while I signed the next deal. I built my towers on top of other people's pain and told myself it was just how business worked. This is my responsibility too." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened and every head turned. A man walked in, escorted by two officers who had clearly just brought him from somewhere else. He was in his late 30s, with tired eyes, a faint scar near his temple, and a stiffness in his walk that hinted at an old injury. Derek recognized him from the grainy footage. Victor. He held no folder now, no bag, just his hands clasped in front of him. One of the officers spoke quietly to the judge, handing her a note. Her eyebrows rose slightly, then she nodded. "It seems we have an unexpected witness," she said. "Mr. Hales, do you wish to speak?" Victor looked from the judge to Derek, then to Mason, who watched him with wide, wary eyes. Slowly he nodded. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice rough. "I have some things to say." He took the stand, and when he swore to tell the truth, his hand shook. "I was the guard in that old parking garage," he began. "I was the one who wrote the report about the loose fixture that no one fixed until it fell. My girl was there that day. She was 8. She loved coming to see where I worked, thought it was cool that her dad protected a tower." His mouth twisted painfully at the word. "When that piece of metal came down and hit her, I thought she was dead. She lived, but she hasn't been the same. Headaches, trouble in school. The company paid for some treatment, signed some papers, and then it was like we never existed. I lost my job a year later. Cuts, they said, efficiency. I watched that building keep shining at night while my girl sat in our small apartment holding her head." His eyes moved to Derek. "So yeah," he said bluntly, "I wanted you to feel something. I wanted your perfect world to crack. When I saw how much you loved that boy, I thought, if he loses him for a day, maybe he'll understand what it's like to live in fear. But once I took him out of that building, I realized I had started something I didn't know how to finish. I panicked. I left him in that car and called Dana, thinking she would fix it, thinking she'd take him to the police, thinking I could crawl back into the shadows." He looked down, shame flooding his face. "I watched the news. I saw you put up posters. I saw you walking the streets looking like a ghost. I thought maybe you had changed. I wanted to come forward, but the longer I waited, the more impossible it felt. The more it seemed like the only thing I was good at was disappearing. The judge's face was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp. "And why are you here now?" she asked. Victor let out a long breath. "Because 2 days ago," he said, "I turned on the TV and saw you sitting on the floor next to that boy's bed reading him a story. It wasn't a fancy clip. Someone in the building had filmed it on their phone and shared it with the news. You weren't wearing a tie. You looked tired. You looked like a man trying, and for the first time I believed you might actually be different from the cold boss I used to watch walk past us like we were invisible." He glanced at Derek again. "And then I got a visit from the police," he added dryly. "They had found my old file. They had questions. I figured I could either keep running or come here and tell the whole story myself." He turned to the judge, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know what you'll decide for me," he said. "I broke the law. I scared a child. I hurt people who had nothing to do with my anger. I'll take whatever comes. But I want you to know something before you decide about his father. That man sitting there did not plan this. He did not know about me or my girl or that broken light. He made mistakes, big ones, but I was the one who turned my pain into a weapon. Don't punish that boy for what grown men like me did." The room was so quiet that every breath sounded loud. Mason suddenly stood up from his seat, his bare pressed against his chest, his small hands shaking. The judge looked at him, surprised. "Young man," she said gently, "do you want to say something?" Mason's voice trembled, but he nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "Can I?" The judge nodded. "You may," she said. "Come stand where we can all see you." He walked to the center of the room, not to the witness stand, just to a spot where he could face the judge, his dad, Dana, Carla, Lee, and even Victor. He looked so small and yet so brave that more than one person wiped their eyes. "I'm not good with big words," he began, his voice thin but clear, "but this is about me, right? Everyone keeps saying my name. So I think I should say what I want." The judge leaned forward slightly. "We'd all like to hear that," she said honestly. Mason took a breath. "I want to go home with my dad," he said, his eyes flicking to Derek and then back to the judge. "I missed him every day. Even when I was mad at him, I still wanted him. When I heard he was putting up posters, it made my heart feel warm and hurt at the same time. But I also don't want to pretend the time I spent with them didn't happen." He pointed at Carla, at Lee, and then at Dana. "She lied to me," he said, looking at Dana, "and that hurt a lot. But she also picked me up from a dark place and stayed up with me when I had nightmares. She made me feel like someone cared when I thought no one did. I don't know if I want to see her soon, but I don't want her locked away forever with everyone saying she's only bad. People can be both." He turned to Carla and Lee. "I want them in my life," he said simply. "Their house is noisy and small, but it's warm. It feels like a real home. I want to go there sometimes, not just on TV or in stories." Then he turned to Victor, surprising even himself. "What you did was really scary," he said, his voice shaking now. "I still wake up sometimes feeling like something bad will happen when I'm not looking. But I saw your face when you talked about your girl. I think you were hurting and no one listened. I don't know what the right punishment is. I just know I don't want to grow up turning my hurt into weapons like you did. I want to be different." Finally, he looked at the judge again. "So this is what I want," he said. "I want to live with my dad. I want him to really be my dad this time, not just someone who comes home late. I want to still see my other family sometimes. I want everyone to get help so they don't hurt more people. And I want to stop feeling like a game piece in grown-up fights. I just want to be a kid who knows he's loved." There were tears on his cheeks now, and when he finished, Derek's lawyer had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. Ms. Lane smiled softly, pride shining in her face. The judge sat very still for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she took off her glasses, folded them, and set them on the bench. "Thank you, Mason," she said quietly. "You have just done something many adults never learn to do. You told the truth about your feelings without trying to hurt anyone with them. That is very brave." She looked around the room, taking in every face. "I will now give my decision," she said, "and I want everyone to remember no decision is perfect, but I will do my very best to honor what is best for this child." She began with the adults who had harmed him. She told Victor that he would face criminal charges for his part in the kidnapping, but that his cooperation and honesty would be taken into account. She told Dana that her case would also proceed, but that she would recommend a sentence focused on counseling, community service with children's charities, and strict rules about contact, rather than simply locking her away. "You have done harm," she said to her, "but you have also shown real remorse. The law must see both." Then she turned to Derek. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady, "you have failed your son in the past, not by not loving him, but by not showing that love with your time and attention. You have also failed people who worked for you by hiding behind your company walls, but in these last weeks you have done something rare. You have stepped out from behind those walls, admitted your fault publicly, and begun to change your life. You have taken responsibility not just for the things that were easy to confess, but for the things that could cost you money and reputation. She paused, then nodded slightly. Therefore, I grant you full legal custody of your son, with the expectation that you will continue to be present, not just physically but emotionally. You will attend parenting counseling and family therapy as recommended by Child Services. You will also provide support for counseling for your son for as long as he needs it. Derek closed his eyes for a second, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then the judge added something that surprised everyone. In addition, she said, I strongly recommend and will put in writing that this child be allowed regular contact with Carla and Lee, supervised at first by his father or a trusted adult to honor the bond they have formed. These visits are not to replace his home but to widen his circle of support. As for Dana, when and if she completes the conditions of her sentence and professionals agree she is safe to be around him, the court will consider limited supervised contact if and only if Mason wishes it. She looked at the boy again. Your heart is big, Mason. We will not force it to close, but we will protect it. Lastly, she addressed Derek's company. One more thing, she said, and her voice grew firmer. You spoke today about a pattern of values that put profits over people. I cannot change your board's decisions with this ruling, but I can say this plainly. I expect you as the owner and public face of that company to take concrete steps to correct past harm, safety upgrades, fair treatment, support for those who were hurt, including Mr. Hales's daughter. If I see headlines about more quiet settlements and more ignored reports, I will remember this case. Derek nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He knew what he had to do. The gavel came down with a sharp sound that echoed through the room, marking the end of the hearing and the start of something entirely new. Later that day, outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters called out questions, but for once Derek did not rush to the microphones. He stood on the steps with his son's hand in his, flanked by Carla and Lee with Ms. Lane nearby, and Dana being led away to begin the long work of making things right in her own way. Cleared his throat and spoke not to the cameras but to the people beside him. I'm starting a new project, he said quietly. Not another tower, a fund named after the girl who was hurt in that parking garage. It will pay for her care and for other children harmed by our past mistakes. And I'm creating a community center in the neighborhood where you live, he told Carla and Lee. A place for kids to feel safe and seen. I'd be honored if you would help me shape it. Carla blinked back tears. You mean it? She asked. Every word, he replied. No more walls between my world and yours. Mason looked up at him, pride shining softly in his eyes. Can we put stars on the ceiling in one of the rooms? He asked. So kids who feel alone can look up and remember they're not invisible. Derek smiled. Yes, he said, we'll cover the whole ceiling if you want. Weeks later, when the center opened, one of the rooms did have a dark blue ceiling filled with painted stars, each one with a tiny name written near it, names of children whose stories had passed through hospitals, courts, and quiet living rooms. One star had the name of Victor's daughter. Another had the name Mason, not because he had been broken, but because he had stood in a courtroom and spoken the truth. Another star had the names Carla and Lee side by side, for the little family that had opened their door without knowing how big a story they were stepping into. And in a small corner of the ceiling, there was a star with the name Dana, a reminder that people who fall can learn to stand again. At home, life was not perfect, but it was honest. There were days when Derek still slipped into old habits and had to catch himself, turning off his phone to sit on the floor and help with homework instead of answering emails. There were nights when Mason woke up shaking and needed his dad to sit by the window and talk about the stars again, making up new stories to replace the scary ones in his head. There were visits to Carla's house, filled with laughter and board games, with Lee bossing everyone around like a tiny judge of her own. And there were letters that arrived from time to time from a rehabilitation center across town, written in careful handwriting from someone who signed her name simply as Dana. Letters that Mason read when he was ready and answered when he wanted to, always with his father by his side. One evening, months after the hearing, as they sat on the balcony of the penthouse looking out at the city lights, Mason pressed his shoulder against his dad's. Do you still think the stars are like city lights in the sky? He asked softly. Derek looked up, feeling the cool air on his face, the steady weight of his son against him. I think there's something more, he said. I think every time we choose love over fear, truth over hiding, people over profits, a new light turns on up there. And I think tonight there are a few more shining because of what you did. Mason smiled, his eyes reflecting both the stars and the city below. For the first time in a long time, his heart felt like a place that could hold both his old pain and his new hope without breaking. And as their story settled into a new kind of normal, the world around them kept spinning, full of people making choices that would lead to other stories, other courts, other second chances. But for this boy and his father, for the little girl who said, "Sir, that boy lives in my house," and for the people whose pain had finally been seen, one thing was clear. The millionaire's world had shattered, but in the pieces, a better life had been built. one where love was louder than fear and where no child had to feel like a forgotten part of someone else's story again. If this story touched your heart, make sure you like, share, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel to support our growth, so we can keep bringing you more powerful, life-changing stories like this one.